Alright, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I have for you guys today, Hunter Labrada. 13 days away from competing at the Chicago Pro, where he will be attempting to qualify for this year's Mr. Olympia. And he's hoping to take the overall victory there. And again, at this point, I'm not exactly sure who his top competition is going to be in Chicago. A couple weeks ago, I would have said Charles Griffen, and we're going to talk about him later in this video. And Sergio was going to do the show. Sergio's not doing Chicago. I heard potentially Hassan Mustafa or Muhammad Shaban are going to either one of those two are doing the show, possibly both. But right now, at 13 days out, 2 weeks out from the Chicago Pro, Hunter Labrada posting videos like this, really revealing how he's looking. I think he looks really solid, and he's got to be a really solid favorite to win this show, and then hopefully, like I said, go on to qualify for the Olympia. But so far, he looks extremely complete. His conditioning looks good. To me, his back looks improved here, and I guess what we're going to see in a few days is really what improvements he made since the last time we saw him on stage at the Olympia. I mean, you guys got to think about how impressive it was for him to make his pro debut at the Tampa Pro, win that show, go to his first Olympia ever, and place in the top 10. He was 8th. Only 2 shows as a pro Hunter had. One of them was his pro debut, which he won, and the other one was a top 10 Olympia placing. His second show ever was the Olympia. So assuming he does well in Chicago, wins Chicago, and goes to the Olympia, he'll be going to the Olympia twice in 4 shows. Well, I guess that is assuming that he doesn't do the Arnold, but I am going to go ahead and assume that he is going to do the Arnold Classic. I'm going to assume he would get a special invitation. Once he's qualified for the Olympia, I firmly think, assuming he does qualify, I firmly believe he would want to do the Arnold Classic, especially considering a lot of the younger guys that have stepped in that lineup so far. But let me know how you guys think Hunter's looking in the comment section down below. Now, next let's talk about Charles Griffen. This guy looks fantastic. He's prepping for the Tampa Pro. He was originally going to do Chicago, but you certainly wouldn't know that he's not 2 weeks out from a show. He looks fantastic here. So again, Charles is a guy, he hasn't competed in a couple of years. We haven't seen him on stage in a while. So I think for that reason, his name kind of gets lost in the mix. But I just want to say how impressive I think it is that he did this guest posing and looked as good as he looked at this guest posing. But the impressive thing to me was the proximity of this to the Tampa show. The Tampa Pro is the weekend of August 5th, so I believe that's exactly 4 weeks out now. So 4 weeks out, this is how he's looking, getting ready for the Tampa show, and he looks incredible. This guest posing, I think he really looks like almost like he could be a week out from a show. He looks really good here. Now, the only thing that's really concerned me about Charles in the past was the size of his legs. I thought his legs need a little bit of work from the size standpoint. He's got a really good upper body, really solid back, really solid arms. But his legs, to me, always looked a little bit small in comparison to the upper body. But in this guest posing, I got to say, he looks like he's put on some size to his legs. But we won't really know for sure until we see him on stage in 4 weeks. And once we see how separated his legs actually are on stage, that's where we're really going to see how improved they really are. But they do look improved to me. So that's really the main thing. That and controlling his midsection are the 2 things that have worried me about Charles in the past. But overall, fantastic bodybuilder, fantastic upper body, and a ton of potential. And a guy going into any of these lineups like Charles, I don't want him to get overlooked. I think this guy can really do some serious damage. I think it's a name that people need to know. And I think, like I said, he might be a guy that's getting written off right now. But I think he looks fantastic. I think he's a serious threat. And he picked a really challenging show to do. I think Chicago would have been a lot less challenging than Tampa, because Tampa, you've got Iain. I mean, Ian's a top 7 Olympian. That's pretty much as good as you can get outside of Hunter Labrada. So he picked a show that was a little bit harder than Chicago, but gave him a little bit more time to prep. If you're talking in terms of Olympia placings, Hunter would technically be easier for him than Iain would. And hell, we still don't know which show Rolly is doing. Rolly could jump in Tampa, he could jump in Chicago, but I've got a feeling it's going to be Tampa. Now, speaking of Iain Valliere and speaking of the Tampa Pro, we got a 4-week out update from Iain himself. Looking pretty impressive at 266 pounds. Iain, to me, not necessarily always from a conditioning standpoint, but from a physique standpoint, especially in the front lat spread, he always kind of resembled Dorian Yates to me. I don't know why, but he always reminded me of Dorian Yates. Now, I know that's a pretty lofty comparison, and that's a pretty those are pretty big shoes to fill. I don't know what it is about his physique, but he just always kind of reminded me of Dorian, especially in that front lat spread pose. He does have a super crazy wide upper body and crazy wide lats, so that could have something to do with it. But yeah, I think Iain looks awesome. 266 pounds, pretty big dude to look like that and be in that kind of shape. And one thing that I really want to see is Iain versus Hunter round 3. The trilogy. We just saw the Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier trilogy this past weekend. Now, Iain and Hunter is kind of similar. The first time around, Hunter beat Iain at that Tampa Pro. The second time around at the Olympia, Iain beat Hunter. He placed higher, one placing higher. So what will the next show they do? What will the result be there? Best 2 out of 3 is what we're looking for, Iain versus Hunter. That's a rivalry I want to see get continued, whether it be at the Olympia, whether it be at the Arnold Classic, or whether Hunter decides to do Tampa as well. That's something that I'm looking for, and maybe you guys are as well. But let me know how you guys think Iain is looking right now. Now, next up in the news, Nick Walker, 11 weeks out, and in this post, he is not referring to the Olympia, of course. He's referring to the Arnold Classic, which it was recently announced that he will be jumping in that lineup as well. And it's kind of silly to look at this physique update and try to look at what improvements he's made since New York, because we saw him compete so recently. You're really not going to be looking for improvements on weak points, and it's in a span that short. You're probably going to be looking for mostly improvements on conditioning. So when we see Nick on stage next, we're going to be looking for a version. I would say we're hoping for something equal to how he looked at New York's prejudging or better. We need to see that at the Arnold, and then certainly we need to see that at the Olympia, equal to or better conditioning than New York Pro prejudging. For him to be really competitive in a really deep lineup like that, I would just like to see the conditioning crisper than it was, even though I think it was fantastic in New York. But also, a lot of people have made a very valid point that those lineups were not the strongest lineups. You put Nick in a lineup with some of these guys like you've got at the Arnold Classic, guys like Bonac, some of the guys that are going to be at the Olympia, guys like potentially Big Ramy, Brandon Curry, Phil Heath. You see him in a lineup like that. That conditioning becomes a lot more important because, let's be honest, while Nick is a mass monster, he's a freak, he's a pretty complete bodybuilder. His conditioning's pretty good. Genetically, he doesn't have the prettiest structure. He doesn't have the prettiest physique. So when you put a guy like Nick Walker, potentially, like I said, we don't know that Phil's competing, but put him next to a guy like Phil Heath that has these crazy round muscle bellies, these crazy genetics, then all of a sudden something like conditioning becomes a lot more important. So when you put a guy like Nick that looks really good in a lineup like that against some of the best genetic freaks in the world, that conditioning is going to matter a whole lot more, and that's what we're going to be looking for at the Olympia. So when you're looking at these physique updates, we're not necessarily looking for improvements on certain body parts. We're looking at basically how shredded he is, or that's what I'm looking at least. Does he look on track to replicate New York or better by the Arnold and then the Olympia? Now, speaking of Phil Heath, I'll leave you guys with this last story. So Phil posted this on his Instagram story a couple days ago with the caption, "Having fun is key." Now, there's been a lot of chatter online with how good Phil has been looking lately from a standpoint of his physique. He's a little bit downsized. It looks like he is downsized from a muscle mass standpoint. He said in past interviews that he's a little bit downsized from an actual physical weight standpoint. But he showed off his midsection. He showed off his abs. He's in pretty good shape. And a lot of people are speculating maybe we're going to see him on stage again in the near future. Will it be the Olympia? Could it be the Arnold Classic? Could it be a random show like Tampa? And then, of course, there's chatter of one of Phil's longtime rivals that competed against Phil in like the early 2010s. Now, that rival was feeding into the chatter of Phil Heath potentially coming back. But I got to admit, I think Phil is looking really good right now. So the question I want to leave you guys with in this video is this. Is it too late for Phil to win that 8th title? Do you guys think it is still possible, yes or no, for Phil to come back and win another one, even after 3rd place last year, 2nd place in 2018? Do you think Phil still has it? Is the chance there? Let me know in the comment section below. Give this video a thumbs up if you did in fact enjoy it, and subscribe if you have not subscribed already. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out.